So Melissa, well, I assume that Commissioner Campos is on her way. So we're going to get this meeting underway. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Board of Education. This is a special meeting. We have no speakers addressing an agenda item, so we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is consideration of Resolution 627 and 628. Can I get a motion to discuss Resolution 627? It's been moved and seconded by?
Second.
By Vice President Elliott. Any discussion or comments or questions? 627. I'll start off by saying I want to thank Mr. Ansborough for responding to the question that I had regarding that. I shared it with the rest of my colleagues. You should direct your attention to Mr. Ansborough's answer. I was concerned that the district has an annual limitation on the amount of borrowing it can do, and I was concerned that this particular resolution might interfere with later capital improvement borrowing that we would have to do as a district. If you review the email that Mr. Ansborough sent, he's had a conversation, I think, with city officials, and that this will not interfere with our ability to borrow in the year coming forward. So that's the only concern I had. Anybody else?
I just want to thank President Cruz, President White. I want to thank Commissioner Cruz for leading us through this process.
We're not there yet.
Oh
no, this is the capital 627. Yeah.
627.
Okay.
Yep. I'll thank President White. I'll thank Commissioner Cruz later.
Okay. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? There being no further comments or questions, all those in favor of Resolution 627 say aye. Aye. Any nays? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk, you recorded that. Now, is there can I get a motion to discuss Resolution 628?
So
It's been moved and seconded by Vice President Elliott, moved by Commissioner Evans. Any discussion or comments? Commissioner Evans?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Commissioner Cruz for leading us through the budget process. This is my 12th budget, and we've been through, as President White, you remember, we never want to go back to the 2011 budget process when me, you, Commissioner Campbell, Commissioner Cruz had to basically write the budget because we had so much, we had an exodus around the time. So this has been much smoother. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and your staff for your work and making sure that you answer all the questions. I don't know if the public has an appreciation for the amount of questions that were asked. So I want to thank you for working to make sure that many of our questions were answered in a timely manner. So thank you to your team and your work, and thank you, Commissioner Cruz, for your work in terms of leading this budget process this year.
Anybody else?
yes, Mr. President. I too want to thank Commissioner Cruz for taking over the role that Commissioner Powell had played for so many years, probably even prior to me being on the board, and just want to say that I think he did an exemplary job of chairing this whole budget process. I want to also thank him for that effort, and looking forward to working with him on this in the future. I'd also like to say that we have to recognize that we have financial constraints, and it just appears as if we don't look at the fact that we've got constraints, and that it means that we can fund some things and may not could fund other things because of constraints. I'd like to see that in the future that even more of our staff is sensitive to that. I've never been, I always think that when people come to try to save their jobs, you know, do they do that in some of the other corporations? And I don't think that they do. And I also think that when you have people who are here trying to save their jobs, the question that becomes in my mind is, you know, we still have a 50% graduation rate. And if those jobs were so important, it would seem to me that the graduation rate and the assessment rates would be far higher. So I'm not all that warm and fuzzy when people come before me wanting to save their jobs. I'd also like to say I think that with regard to our unions, I think they've been conciliatory with the superintendent, but I think that the unions have to recognize it even more, that the unions are going to have to be conciliatory because there's not a lot of money available. And so whereas we used to be able to fund generously a number of legacy health care, days off, what have you, everybody's going to have to look at how do we be conciliatory because we have a budget that we have to balance every year. It's real important that we have to take into consideration. If we don't, you know, who knows, you know, there may even be even more cuts that we have to make. And then even if people come and advocate for their jobs, for programs, what about other cuts? Where do we cut it? So I think that we have to really, as we work together on our budgets in the future, I want people to consider, if you want to save this, then also say where do you cut? And then provide a rationale for why you want it cut. Because many people, we are in our own respective places and we don't always appreciate what the other person is doing or why we necessarily need this program. And so there's not a lot of money available. I just want to thank again the superintendent for his advocacy that he's done since he's been here. He has generated, advocated and generated millions of dollars from the state of New York, but we're not going to always have those kinds of opportunities in favor because at some point, you know, funding is going to dry up. I'd also say, lastly, Mr. President, we have not really taken seriously what the superintendent has been saying to us year after year after year. Student population is going down. There are a number of charter schools, a number of other school alternatives, because we're not doing our job in educating our kids. The adults are very good at coming and advocating for them an increase or keeping their jobs. Don't see that same kind of energy in ensuring that our children are educated, because the fact is that if we do educate our kids, there are jobs available, because the kids are going to be here as opposed to going to urban suburban program or opposed to going to a charter program, they will remain in here. But because we're not educating them, they're leaving. And so if they leave, that means staff positions have to be eliminated as well. So I want us all to think about, if you're coming to advocate for your jobs, what are you doing to make sure that every child in this district is educated and career and college ready and are exceeding and excelling on every assessment that they take? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Anybody else? Commissioner Adams?
We just received on the dais an updated document with 3 pages, 4 pages of updates to the budget. So we haven't had an opportunity to look at this, which is very problematic. But I'll just ask one specific question from it. On the update that we received over the weekend, there was updated revenue, which included categories of receivership aid for East High School and expanded learning time funding. Are those considered grants and special aid?
In one area, there is 75 million that we put aside for school like East and Monroe and Charlotte, which is close and that qualify in school number 9. And those grants, right now, they're working on a formula, basically, that is per pupil basic. So it's almost a guarantee because the dollars is earmarked for that. The school improvement grant, that is a grant, that's a competitor grant, so meaning you have to compete. The one that is more secure, if you will, nothing is 100%, but the school number 9, Charlotte, and Monroe do qualify for the $75 million that have been put aside.
My question is, on this spreadsheet that we received over the weekend, there's a heading called revenue, and within that there are 2 lines, well, there's several lines, but one of the line is receivership aid for East High School, the other one is ELT funding. My question is, in terms of just technical budget categorization, are those considered grants and special aid?
Go ahead, Bill, please.
Right, we put the ELT in the grant fund and the 3.3 in the general fund. The exact location of that will be dependent upon, the outcome of the process with SED. But as we discussed during the budget deliberation session, that revenue estimate for East High was our estimate based upon the per pupil statewide, and given that we have approval from SED as part of our East program, we thought that was a reasonable estimate at this time. But the categorization of that could change at some later time.
But if the state is giving us receivership aid, that's not considered grant or special aid funds in terms of the fund that it comes from?
Again, at this point, we're making an assumption based upon what we know at this time. We have imperfect information because the specifics of that $75 million has not been allocated at this time. So we have to make a judgment at this juncture in which category to budget it. We're showing it in the general fund at this time. If we get later direction from SED, then we could come back, amend the budget as we've done in other similar situations where categorizations change, and then we would make that adjustment at that time.
So I get it that the amount is based on best information, but in terms of a budget, a revenue source, if it's a general fund, then that implies that it could be used for any purpose throughout the district. It should be categorized here, I think, as a special aid fund, right?
Can I just ask a follow-on question, because I'm not understanding?
That just doesn't make sense
I'm not
to put it in the
Commissioner
general fund when...
Commissioner Adams' question, but Commissioner Adams, are you talking about the fund where the regs have not been written yet from the state, and that's why we don't...
Right, it's the money associated from East High. We truly don't know at this juncture, what you could budget it either way. The money is earmarked for East, it's tied to East, and, I'm being transparent about that as we were during the budget deliberation session.
Because I believe that their deadline is something like June,
Yes.
right, in terms of when they can decide how it's going to be used. I mean, I hope they would decide earlier, but right now, we really have no clue until they write those regulations.
Correct.
Well, it just seems to me like it would be remarkable if that pot of money could be used without any kind of discretion, given that they've clearly said that that $75 million can only be used for first line, what's the word, not, persistently failing as opposed to failing. So the persistently failing is the first year, Dyer ones, 9, Charlotte, and so forth. So those ones, the $75 million applies only to those schools, that first year persistently failing, the very worst of the worst, according to the state's categorization. So to say that you would anticipate that this $3.3 million would be in a general use category when they've already very strictly identified that they're not even allowing that money to be used for other priority schools doesn't make sense. And I'll just get to the point. The reason I'm asking is because if you add up those 2 categories, the receivership aid for East and the expanded learning time funding, you get $6.1 million that was added to revenue in the estimates that were provided over the weekend. And then what's on the dais in front of us now is that there's an added grants and special aid of $2.9 million. So I guess I'm just questioning that you know, and again, this was just put in front of us, but that seems like a pretty discrepant categorization and estimate to me.
Yeah, the weekend was to give you a sense at a high level of where we were. Again, you know, the East High revenue, you know, is assumed to go to East High. You know, remember during the budget process, you know, we made an assumption about, you know, some revenue stream from the state. We didn't know a portion of it could come in foundation aid, a portion of it could come in some other revenue stream. It ended up coming in another revenue stream to support East, right?
Okay.
And for work, it won't impact, you know, the program decision. It's a matter of where you categorize it at this time. So we didn't want to be presumptuous at this time, so, you know, we show it the way we show it, and
Okay.
then we'll go forward.
All right, thanks. So if that's the case, then on this newest document that we just received, the first line is general, and it shows a change from the draft budget of $685 million approximately to, well, there's a difference of $214,000. So is that $3.3 million in that calculation on the general line in this most recent document that we received?
Everton, prepared this document. We, as the board knows, with the changes coming over the weekend, we had, you know, today to pull this together.
Yes, it's included in the general.
Okay, thank you.
line.
All right, thanks. So I have some general comments because I appreciate it, thank you. I want to provide an explanation for my no vote tonight, despite sincerely, and I mean this sincerely, notable work by especially both of our deputy superintendents and others throughout the administration who have really effectively responded and done really hard work up until today and including today, and I know it's ongoing and never ends, in terms of responding to several important specific concerns, including things that I've raised. You've been responsive, and I appreciate that. For example, the correction to the radical underfunding of the youth and justice alternative programs and the work that involved in that are very much appreciated. Still, the budget globally underprioritizes support for direct service to students in many of our schools. We are appropriately supporting East High based on a deliberate and comprehensive evidence-based plan. There are too many schools and programs in this district with capable leaders struggling to implement similarly deliberate and comprehensive evidence-based plans. Our students are suffering the consequences of inadequate resources at the school and program level. As a board, we have signaled that we believe the University of Rochester leaders when they tell us the increased dollars are necessary in order to pursue excellence. We should be willing to look for evidence of leadership and incremental progress and/or challenges to progress at each and every school and program in this district. There are unresolved concerns with core subject staffing ratios, personnel to support academic support and differentiation, specialized staffing, including social and emotional support. We should be able to demonstrate with our budget an acknowledgement of evidence, educational leadership, and the need for realistic resource allocation that will set our schools and programs up for success, similar to the commitment we are making with respect to East High School. So my overall concern and reason for the most global concern with the budget, and I think that this back and forth just now also demonstrated some difficulties in terms of just really being able to see accurate pictures of revenue and allocation, and I realize that there is some element of timing and so forth, but I think that we could get a much better accurate prediction so that we as the board could drive prioritization. There are absolutely constraints, I acknowledge that. There are absolutely places that will be cut. But my concern, I just want to give one example in terms of one of the superintendent's points in presenting the budget was a claim that we would be reducing central office staff by about 50 or a little over 50 people. When I look at the administration profile, so central office we generally think of as administration, right? I mean, we think of central office as being administration. So section 6 of our budget book includes all of the administration profiles. if you look at the administration section overall, there's actually only a loss of 8 positions, not 50 or 60. If you look at Section 6, but you take away the OASIS program, which has suffered some losses, there's actually an addition of 7.5. If you look at the administration section, but you extract from the analysis the OASIS program, which arguably is not really a central office or an administrative function. It really is a program. So I just, you know, and I've done this with, you know, if you look at all of Section 6 plus the school chiefs, then we actually are adding centrally 43.6 positions. And this is based on the draft budget numbers, which I'm sure have adjusted a little bit. If you look at Section 6, except OASIS, but you add in the chiefs, we're adding 50 positions. So you get the idea that depending on how you categorize the concept of central office, we can actually see an addition of positions. Now, I want to be very clear because it's a pet peeve of mine when we are presented information without a full background and, you know, full assumptions and so forth. Many of these positions that are centrally will be working in schools. The added reading teachers, for example, are in these central budgets. Summer school is included in the chief's budgets. So, and the psychologists, having been centralized, are in the central budget. So it's not that we're adding positions of people who are not providing any direct service. That's not true, and I want to be very clear about that. But overall, when we're looking at resources and staffing that's controlled at the building level by our educational leaders to do things like what East High School is doing versus what is either funded and located at central office or controlled centrally, there's definitely still a weight on central allocation. So that's important to me to make that observation and concern regarding my no vote. And I'll leave it at that. I have other concerns. I have concerns about revenue coming in and being, so I guess one thing, what I would like to see instead of having stability or increasing in central office, I would rather see stability at the building level. And that might mean, even though we can't put Title I money, SIG money on our books, and I'm not suggesting we do when they're not absolutely firm, but if we could write in the cuts to the places that are farthest away from students, and then when the revenue comes in, adjust, bring it back to the building level, and then shift the revenue centrally. I would really rather see that so that our building leaders could have the stability and the predictability, our programs would not be cut, and then maybe at the last minute restored if funding comes through.
Any other comments?
Mr. President?
Yep.
I'll try to be brief. I also will be voting no. My vote is going to be a protest vote. I support my colleagues' intention to make an unpalatable budget palatable with board-driven amendments. But while I'm voting with while I support my colleagues' efforts, I have not made any of my own concerns, added any of my own concerns to that list. I look back at last year's budget amendments, and it's clear to me that the administration will undermine our intention where they don't agree with it, by leaving positions vacant and so on. My vote is also a vote of no confidence. This is the budget that was presented to us. This is how many pages it took to answer our questions. This is not a transparent budget. Once upon a time, we could go through our committee and ask a question, and Vern Connors would say, if you would look to page such and so, and the answer was pretty clear. It didn't require volumes of paper to justify the budget. It just took a little bit of training on how to read the budget. Finally, I'm upset that the superintendent and his staff referenced the receivership funding and legislation. We know through direct conversation with SED that implementation will not affect this year's budget. So I have to conclude that Ed Schultz's theory on Republican Rule Number 3 applies in this situation. Thank you.
Chairman Cruz?
I want to take just a couple quick minutes, not to reiterate what's already been said, but I want to thank my colleagues for being patient as we've gone through this process. It's been a pretty smooth process, considering, as Commissioner Evans says, we've had years where there wasn't. But I think there was a lot of open dialogue. There was a lot of ideas being thrown back and forth, and I have to think that some of the changes that we eventually end up making in the budget were really because we took an opportunity to listen to folks in the community, our labor partners, our staff, and then in amongst ourselves. So I think that's been a positive part of all of this. I want to thank the superintendent and his staff for being open and getting us information, and Bill and Everton take the day off tomorrow. And, you know, Bill's always being very transparent, and he's very honest, but don't believe him when he sends you a text message that says, on a Sunday evening, I need 5 minutes of your time. 26 minutes later, Bill. But I think to that end, what I appreciated was that the adjustments were coming in on a daily basis up through the weekend, up through the beginning of this week, and I appreciated that at least we were honing in on those numbers. And like any budget, you know, it's a real projection of what your income is going to be. It's going to be a projection of what your expenses are going to be. And that's why we always have the opportunity later on to make adjustments. And there's just no way in the world, you know, when you're dealing with an $800 million budget and the partners that we deal with, especially in the state, giving the late runs that we had to deal with and all those kinds of issues, it's amazing that we've gotten this far. And so I think this is a good budget. I think it reflects a lot of the programs that we support. I think it reflects a lot of listening to some of the things that we've heard from the staff. And I think to that end, you know, we should be applauded as a district for putting together a process and a budget that I think tries to address what, you know, philosophically we believe in this. We believe in terms of our commitment to educating our children. You know, sometimes there's some misconceptions about how we put together budgets. Unfortunately, we don't have broken out, and maybe we should, Bill, break out in the future to let people know especially how much discretion we really do have in a budget. And I think there's a misconception out there that we have $800 million and we can just use it on anything we want, when in fact a very small percentage of that money really is discretionary. It's all grant programs, it's all restricted, it's all leveraged, it's all dedicated. So we sometimes don't have the discretion that sometimes people think we do, but we do a good job with the discretion we do have. So I think those are basically my comments. I also want to take a second and special recognition for Deborah's work. Deborah has done some phenomenal work in terms of budget analysis. You know, she's become a budget analyst now. You can add that to your resume as well. And also for the staff. And all those questions, there were hundreds of questions. Sometimes with a day's notice, we'd get responses back, we'd get them out. And I don't know how other districts do it. I sort of tend to doubt that many districts do the budgeting the way we do it, in terms of being open about questions and getting them to the staff. And I think what's happened as a result of all that great information, we've had a good, smooth budget process. We've had some great meetings. We've had public meetings. We've had public deliberations. I think it's a very open process. And so for all that, I want to thank everybody and thank you for your support. And Willa's not here. I wanted to thank Willa for mentoring.
She's there. Oh, she's there.
Oh, you were leaning back. I didn't see you. Willa, thank you for the mentoring and the transition from last year to this year. And I look forward to, dare I say it, next year's budget. Thank you.
Mr. Campos?
Being my last budget season, I'm going to focus on the good. And first of all, I just want to thank Commissioner Cruz, the superintendent, the staff, Deborah, for everything that you've done. What I appreciate about this is the continuation of extended learning time, especially being a mom of a little boy who attends 23, which is an ELT school, and he loves school, and he loves music, he loves art, and the way that we are staying true to those key things. I was just at School 12 today, and the principal said what we really appreciate is the superintendent's carrying through with the art and with music here at 12, and we feel that difference. I'm also looking forward to see what the revamped health education is going to look like, and how we can be able to arm our kids with the types of things that they need before even 7th grade, and looking at integrating it into the Common Core. I'm excited about East High and what's going to happen and the potential there. And I'm also excited to look at what's going to happen in the bilingual department and looking at changes for achievement for our Latino students. So while I was, I was sad about what happened with the losses in Oasis, I can understand based on attendance why we need to restructure. I'm also excited about CTE. So I think that there's a lot of good things that are going to be taking place and have already taken place. So I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank your staff. So thank you very, very much, Commissioner Cruz. It was a pretty smooth budget process this time around, so well done.
Thank you, Commissioner Campos. I'll finalize with my comments. It's going to sound like a broken record, but I want to thank Commissioner Cruz, in fact, the entire Finance Committee. As Commissioner Cruz indicated, there was several public hearings, several meetings with the board and the administration regarding the budget, and everybody, by and large, was patient and indulgent and dutiful in their task of producing the budget that we have today. Like Commissioner Cruz, I want to thank Deborah. Up until this afternoon, she was answering questions that I had, and I know she did the same for other board members. Dr. Vargas, you are not going to take her away from us. She is quite the student of the budget, and I know I speak for every board member here in appreciating the service that you provide and the diligent way in which you do it. You all know she really cares about the job, and we can't thank you enough, Deborah, for that hard work. And in fact, just a little side story, Dr. Vargas and I, along with Deputy Superintendent Adele Bavard, we were at East today, and I needed very much, Edison, I'm sorry. Keith was there as well, and I wanted to present Congressman Bobby Scott, who is the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee in the United States Congress, a special gift, and I didn't have it with me. And the only person I could reach was Deborah, and Deborah literally went and got this gift for me on her own dime, by the way. She won't accept me reimbursing her. And the gift was, by the way, a free refill cup from Nick Tahoe's. So thank you, Deborah. She is really there when we need her, and we really appreciate that. And the moments that I have spent calling out your name are well worth it, and I know every board member appreciates your service. So I want to thank the members of the central office, a team that put this budget together, Bill, Dr. Vargas, of course, Everton, and other people whose names I'm going to forget, who probably do a lot of the work that Bill rightfully and Everton get the credit for. And do us a favor, send direct thanks from the Board of Education if we've missed any names. Tell them we do really appreciate the work that they do. In that regard, the board, for everybody else, I want you to know we listened to your many concerns, and we responded appropriately in our judgment when we thought changes were needed in the budget. Quite regularly and frequently, although some people had taken issue with some of the things the administration had recommended, on many occasions we found their rationale to be sound and just. Difficult decisions, just the same, but sound and just. Oasis was an example that Commissioner Campos reflected on the fact that in the end, I know this is a difficult decision for many people, but two divisions within Oasis, the numbers didn't seem to suggest that there was the necessary demand for those services. So we had to look at the administration's recommendation, and that recommendation was, in fact, sound. Additionally, there were other difficult decisions, but once again, the administration's position was sound. The deployment of school psychologists, special ed. Dr. Vargas and I met with, and Dr. Atua and I met with staff people about their concerns. And we found, and I repeated, and there are people in this room that will tell you that I repeated personally, from my perspective at least, that the administration's perspective on the need for cuts or redeployment was appropriate, and it was an exercise of sound judgment. I say all this to my colleagues because quite regularly, superintendents like Dr. Vargas will say, we don't get the support of the Board of Education. If you look at this budget, and this doesn't just apply to Dr. Vargas, by the way. I think every superintendent has said this about the Board of Education. They don't support the things that we do. If you look at this budget, I would say, I'm not the budget guy like Everton, but I would say we supported 90-something% of what the administration supported. This is a budget just under $1 billion. We probably supported, through this vote, I'm anticipating we will support most of what this administration has advocated for. There were, however, occasions, rare though they were, that we did not. And in a democracy such as this, where people are elected to share their expertise and their judgment, it's appropriate for us to exercise our own discretion and judgment. And I think on a number of occasions we did that fairly and justly. In the case of the mailroom, the grants office, New Beginnings, and Youth and Justice, I am proud of the fact that this Board of Education, any number of these members sitting up here, spoke up and persuaded their colleagues that the particular approach presented, limited though it was, that the administration offered was not the right approach. Nothing wrong with that in a democracy, and that's in fact why each and every one of us are up here. But again, I would repeat, in case anybody has a short memory, most of what this administration has offered to move forward to this community for the 15-16 school year has been approved, and we should all take some joy in that because the democracy is working. I am proud of this Board of Education when it exercises this kind of initiative. Think about it, colleagues. When we've done that in the past, it has reaped benefits. For example, former President Evans will recall that it was this Board of Education that said we ought to have reading teachers. We began to articulate that voice first. And now, a couple years later, Dr. Vargas is doing a wonderful thing, and his staff really reinvigorating the notion that there ought to be specialists in terms of reading. I should say, we've done that before. This is not the first time that we've done that. Do you all remember when Jean-Claude Bazard was here, and there was this decision that they wanted to back away from social workers, that they didn't think they needed them, and we said as a board, no. Actually, we were a little bit more vocal than that. And that was a good, sound decision. So to Dr. Vargas and his team, for those things that we didn't agree with you on, Rome is not going to fall apart. We've agreed with most of what you said, and we're I'm anticipating that you will get a vote that suggests that this is the way we should move forward collectively. A couple of administrative concerns that I want to point out. I had some concerns about SEG. I would ask my colleagues to direct their attention to the correspondence that I will forward to you from our attorneys from Hutchins Ross and Ed Lopez Soto. Ed has been communicating with Jeff, our outside counsel, about the impact that the budget decisions that we're making about SEG appointments will have on whether those appointments will be permanent, given our prior resolution. Those issues really aren't resolved, but I am voting yes for this budget because I believe we have a paper trail that suggests what will happen and how it should happen, and I see Mr. Lopez shaking his head in agreement. So I'm comfortable that the decision that the board made a couple of months ago will not be obviated or destroyed by the decision that we made today. I also want to point out that I had expressed some concern about the money that was allotted for the two-year receivership schools. Commissioner Adams correctly points out that the money that has been set aside is exclusively for those one-year track schools. Nothing else. That money can only be used for those 4 schools. There are a set of schools that are in a 2-year pot, and the state decided, for whatever reason, not to give them any money. The administration, when we brought it up I expressed some concern about the $642,500 that was set aside for some 12, 13 schools, 14 schools, and I suggested that we're spending $10 million at one school. How in the heaven's name was $642,500 going to support the turnaround of 14 schools, even if just half of those schools needed that support? I was told by Deputy Superintendent Bovard that she reminded me that there is SIG money that would be available for those. So once again, we are relying on the representations of the administration that more money will be made available to these schools. So I am comfortable with that particular resolution. I will also say Commissioner Powell's remarks were right on time with respect to unfulfilled budget amendments. I am not going to hesitate to say, and I've said it to some colleagues here, this Board of Education has made decisions just last budget round, and those decisions were never implemented. That will not happen this time around. We cannot let it happen. We pass these resolutions, whether they're budget or otherwise, with the intention that the board's goals and ambitions and directions for this school district will be respected like the goals and directions and ambitions of the administration. And everybody up here knows what specific resolutions I'm talking about. So Commissioner Powell's remarks cannot be disregarded. We must move forward in a spirit of good faith and respect, and understand that the administration's goals, which we're going to support tonight, should be pushed forward, as should the board's goals and priorities as reflected in tonight's vote. Overall, colleagues, I would say good things are going to happen as a result of this budget. The pursuit of reading teachers that Dr. Vargas and his team have led is an encouraging thing for our children and our families. The restoration of Edison High School, Keith and Adele and Dr. Vargas, good things are going to happen because of that work there, and Congressman Bobby Scott and Congresswoman Slaughter saw that today. What is going to happen at East, as Commissioner Campos says, I certainly hope it's not her last bit of good news while she's up here. I think she's prophetic, though. I think great things are going to happen at East High School, and that's because Dr. Vargas and the board got together and figured out we need to give money to schools that have been thoughtful and came up with meaningful plans, as Commissioner Adams said. And then finally, again, just to remind Dr. Vargas and his predecessors, superintendents past, this superintendent has from day one said we ought to support attendance and extended day. And again, to remind him, and all those who out here who maybe think, well, wait a second, why did they add this, why did they add that? We have supported almost unrelentingly, and I know he will concede this, Dr. Vargas' support of extended day, because it's a good idea, it's a good ambition. It's one of the great inequities in this county, as he has pointed out repeatedly. This administration has repeatedly said, and they're saying again tonight, and the board is reaffirming it, that we ought to have more time in our seats for our kids. So with that having been said, if there's nothing further, I'm going to call for a roll call vote. We can begin with Commissioner Powell.
My vote is no.
Commissioner Evans?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Vice President Elliott?
Yes.
Commissioner Cruz?
Yes.
Commissioner Campos?
Yes.
And Commissioner Adams?
No.
Yes. Madam Clerk, did you record that vote?
Yes.
Dr. Vargas? The budget passed, by the way, if you didn't notice.
I want to say thank you for that, and thank you to President White, Vice President Elliott, and Commissioner Cruz did an incredible job in getting us through this year. I also want to thank the budget team, Bill and his team, and everyone involved from the deputies that I hear that too many to mention. They have a lot of people behind them as well that need to be appreciated for what they do each day here in this district. I said to you in Rochester, we used to have an approach that we used to talk about what we don't have or what we didn't have. And thanks to this board, we have shifted that around to talk about what we have. What can we do? We are resourcing. East High School Commission campus is I agree with you 100%. You're going to see great things, not just at East, but you're going to see throughout school-wide, because we are not changing every day. If you are a teacher here, you are beginning to see hope that we are not laying you off. If you work for any of our bargaining unit, when you look at district throughout New York State, particular big urban district, Rochester is in a unique category. And that is that, yes, we can always use more resources, but the resources that we have, we are using it well. And that is thanks to the direction that the Board of Education has set forward through the action plan. And we're in the action plan out aiming, and I know this is go credit to Commissioner Cruz. He said to me, the problem in education is that too many of us use a lot of jargon, and our families and our teachers and our workforce need to understand that this, to be a great district, we need to treat every child like one of our own. And yes, it has to be about providing our children, closing the opportunity gap that we are facing. In this budget, you also will begin to see something that we need to invest even more, and that is in the school environment. And I want to thank the board for also particularly Commissioner Adams, who had a conversation with me about how can we bring the community to help us, parents and family, and you see some investment, not sufficient. We could do more, but again, a budget is about priority. We cannot do everything at once. I do believe, and I will close with this, that there's tremendous opportunity here in this district is still for efficiency. That, yes, we could begin to shift even more resources to the classroom and to close the opportunity gap. I want to thank you also for leading by example. We are going to provide employment for 100 youngsters, our students. And I do believe that not just the district, but businesses and also community organizations, if they were to employ at least 1 or 2 youth that go to the school district, they begin to see hope. And instead of being in the street, they will be, an adult working. So I am very proud of the values that the budget represents. Not perfect, just like human. The budget is not perfect. But if you were to look up the values that the budget represents, we are not where we need to be, but nevertheless, we are moving in the right direction. I do leave you with one challenge, and I will conclude. Vice President Elliott said something that we all need to pay attention, and that is how do we adjust our expenditure to the current reality. The current reality is that we are losing students. No superintendent or school board wants to be in that situation, but you cannot continue to ignore that reality. And I'm proud of our bargaining unit. Many of our leaders, Mr. De Clemente, this is something that I have repeatedly brought up to every union president, that this district could be in the cutting edge nationwide as far as being a district was a district of choice, not a district in which family year after year didn't know whether they were going to have art or music or sport or extracurricular activity. And we are beginning to see a stability in our enrollment. But we have a long way to go and also a significant challenge. The reality is, as some parent, I choose in charter school and other school outside the district instead of choosing us. And I do believe that that is not just the responsibility of the superintendent. To the extent that our workforce believe that that's something to be fixed here at central office, this is where the ultimate responsibility resides. And I take responsibility to turn our district around, along with the Board of Education, but we cannot do it alone. We need everyone who works here every day to treat every child like one of our own, and we could be a great district. And again, thank you to the entire team, not just our school principal, our entire administration. Will continue to work on this budget now to execute. And we are not going to do it perfectly. I mean, we are going to make mistake because this is a complex budget, but anyone would tell you that our people are working hard every day to make sure that we do the very best for our students. And again, thank you, President White. And as I look forward in the implementation of the budget, our staff will tell you that today at 4 o'clock, in anticipation of your vote, we met, and one item only of discussion is how are we going to execute and how we are going to improve from last year to this year. And I thank them again, and to the 6,000 people that work for us that play a part on this budget in terms of the execution of it.
Can I get a motion to adjourn? So moved. Been moved
Can I
and...
just real quick?
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, I don't know if you did, it's Teacher Appreciation Week, and so just a quick point of personal privilege, just to thank our teachers, and that's it, real quick.
That's great, thank you.
It's a good way to end the meeting. Happy Teacher Appreciation Day, everybody. Good night.